There are children who arrive quietly, like drops of rain that no one notices until the earth softens beneath them. He was one of those children. His birth was not marked by grand celebrations or whispered prophecies. It happened in the hush of an ordinary evening, in a town so small the street lamps leaned in toward one another as though sharing secrets. Yet from the first night, there was something in him that lingered beyond the moment. When he was only days old, he began to hum in his sleep. Not songs he had heard, not lullabies sung by his mother, but something older, something that belonged to neither language nor memory. The sound was soft, like a thread pulled through fabric, like water trickling from stone. His parents, though startled at first, soon grew used to it. They would lie awake sometimes, listening, not understanding why their hearts felt calmer when the child's strange melodies drifted through the dark. In those earliest years, the town learned of the boy not through the things he did while awake, but through the echoes he left behind. A neighbor swore she once heard him giggle in her kitchen, though he was nowhere near. Another claimed the boy's humming followed her all the way down the lane, fading only as she stepped into her doorway. No one called it magic, small towns rarely do, but they knew there was a softness about him that did not quite belong to the ordinary world. As he grew, his gift revealed itself in another way. He could stretch time, not in the grand, impossible sense of making clocks pause or seasons halt, but in the gentler sense of making moments linger. When he laughed, the ee-ta sound carried longer than it should have, hanging in the air like a bell after the clapper rests. When he reached for his mother's hand, the warmth seemed to last beyond the touch. Even when he cried, the sadness felt like it remained in the room, tender and lingering, as though the air itself wished to keep him company. Most children hurry through their days, eager for the next discovery, the next game. But this child moved differently. He lingered. He stayed with things. If he saw a bird pause on the fence, he would watch until it flew away, and even then his gaze would remain, tracing the invisible path long after it had gone. He liked to sit beneath the willow tree by the stream, repeating a single word quietly until it sounded strange and new again, as if words themselves were small worlds he could stretch open and climb inside. It was under that same willow tree that he first met her, the girl who spoke in riddles. She was older by 2 or 3 years, with eyes that always seemed to be searching the distance for something she couldn't quite name. She would say things like, "The wind knows more than the leaves, don't you think?" Or, "If you hold your breath at the right moment, you can hear the sky listening back." He didn't always understand her words, but he understood her heart. The two of them would sit together in long silences, sometimes sharing bread his mother had wrapped in cloth, sometimes just watching the stream drift by. When she spoke, he listened as though every word was a pebble being dropped into a pond. When he hummed, she listened too, tilting her head as though trying to catch the shape of the echo. They were children, yes, but already they carried the beginnings of that secret kind of friendship that doesn't need definition, only presence. There was one evening, golden and slow, when he noticed something new. The willow leaves swayed in the light breeze, and for a moment time seemed to stretch with him. He blinked and the air shimmered. The girl gasped softly and whispered, "You made the day longer." Of course he hadn't. The sun would still set as it always did. But in that instant, it felt as if the world had taken a deep breath, holding itself open just for them. The boy said nothing, only smiled shyly, and the moment slipped away like water through fingers. Yet even as the years went on, he would remember that golden hush, his first awareness that his strange softness might not only belong to him, but to the spaces he shared with others. The townsfolk grew fond of him in their quiet ways. They would nod to him as he passed, sometimes offering apples or a pat on the shoulder. They didn't ask much of him, nor did they ever quite name what was different. But when he was near, people seemed to slow down. Conversations softened. The weight of the day lifted just a little, and though he was still only a child, he began to sense something, that his small quirks, his stretched-out laughter, his lingering silences were not mistakes or oddities. They were gifts. Gifts not meant to dazzle or amaze, but to remind others of gentleness, of the preciousness of ordinary hours. That night, lying in his bed with the window cracked open to the cool air, he hummed again, low and steady. His mother paused at the doorway listening. She placed her hand against her heart without meaning to, and felt it beat in rhythm with the sound. The boy's eyes closed, but his song seemed to keep watch over the house, flowing like a quiet river until even the walls seemed to sigh into rest. It was then, perhaps, that his story truly began, not with a grand adventure, not with a prophecy, but with a hum in the dark. A hum that stretched itself across the hearts of those who listened, leaving behind a warmth they couldn't name. And somewhere inside that warmth, the child dreamed. Dreamed in echoes that belonged not only to him, but to anyone willing to hear. Time. For most people, drifts like a river, always moving forward, never pausing, never waiting. But for him it was different. Time seemed to linger at his side like a patient friend, bending softly to his quiet nature. He first noticed it one summer morning when he sat by the kitchen table, a piece of bread in his hand. The crust was still warm, the butter melting into golden pools, and he chewed slowly, savoring every bite. His father laughed gently, watching him. "You eat like the world will wait for you," he said. And strangely, it did. While others rushed, moments stretched for him. The ticking clock on the wall did not hurry him. The sun spilling through the curtains seemed in no rush to move. He finished his bread only when he was ready, as though time itself had leaned back, content to linger. At first, no one thought much of it. He was simply a slow child, they said, thoughtful, unhurried, but those closest to him felt something deeper. His mother noticed how, when he laughed, the room seemed to brighten longer than it should. His brother realized that a moment of play in the yard felt like it lasted all afternoon, though only minutes had passed. And his friend beneath the willow tree, she was the first to whisper it aloud. "You make time bend," she told him once, her eyes wide with the certainty of a child who believed what she felt. "When you're here, everything takes longer, but in a good way, like the world doesn't want to stop." He didn't know how to respond, so he only smiled, tucking the words away like a secret treasure. Years passed in the way they often do, slow when watched closely, fast when remembered. Yet for him, time remained pliable. Not in every moment, not always, but in flashes of tenderness. A hug from his mother would linger on his skin long after she let go. A word of encouragement from his brother would echo softly inside his chest for days. Even the sorrow of a scolding or a scraped knee stretched thin and low, drawn out until it softened into something less sharp, less frightening. He began to wonder if this was what it meant to be alive, to hold things longer than they were given. The others seemed so quick to move past moments, to hurry toward what was next, but he liked to stay, to feel, to let the ripples of one instant carry him into the next. Sometimes, though, it was lonely. While the other children raced down the lanes, eager for games and noise, he found himself standing still, eyes lifted to the clouds. He liked the way they drifted, slow and enormous, unbothered by the rush of the world below. The others would call to him, impatient, but he didn't always answer. He was busy listening, to the sky, to the breeze, to the hidden rhythm of hours stretching quietly around him. One afternoon, as the sun slid low, he lingered by the stream with his friend. The water caught the light in shifting ribbons, and the air felt golden, heavy with the smell of summer grass. "Do you think time has feelings?" she asked suddenly, dipping her toes into the water. He tilted his head, considering. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe time just wants to be noticed." She laughed, a soft ripple of sound. "Then you must be its favorite. You always notice." The thought stayed with him. Perhaps his gift was not about bending time at all, but about listening to it. Others rushed through days like riders on horses, galloping without pause, but he walked. He listened. And because he listened, time gave him more. He began to practice it in his own quiet way. When he saw his mother's hands working the dough for bread, he would study them carefully, the way her fingers pressed and folded, the flour dusting, her skin like snow. He found that if he paid attention deeply enough, the moment stretched, lasting longer than it should. When his brother shared a story, he leaned close, repeating each detail in his mind, and the story seemed to expand, filling. the air like a living thing. It wasn't magic, not really. It was attention. It was presence. It was the art of holding on to now. And yet sometimes it startled others. A neighbor once remarked that she lost track of time whenever he visited, as though the hours slipped differently in his company. His teacher paused mid-lesson one day, frowning at the clock, unable to explain why it felt as though the afternoon had doubled in length. But he didn't try to explain it. He only carried it quietly as part of himself. There was a night late in his childhood when the world revealed the gift to him in a new way. He had been restless, unable to sleep, and wandered outside into the yard. The stars glimmered sharp and cold, and the moon hung low, heavy with silver. He lay in the grass, arms stretched wide, listening to the crickets hum. And then it happened. The moment thickened. The night air seemed to pause. His breath slowed. His heart steadied, and for an instant he felt as though the universe itself had leaned down to rest beside him. Time was not rushing forward, not dragging him along. It was simply there, soft, patient, infinite. He closed, his eyes humming softly, and when he opened them again, the stars had not moved. The world had waited. The next morning, no one believed him. His mother smiled and smoothed his hair, saying he must have been dreaming. His brother teased him gently, calling him a night wanderer, but the girl beneath the willow tree listened differently. "I believe you," she whispered, eyes glowing with certainty, "because I've felt it too when you're around. Like the day is willing to hold itself open, just for us." It was then he understood something he had not before. His quirk was not meant for him alone. It was meant to be shared. Time, when stretched, became a gift for others as well. A way to hold on to what mattered, a laugh, a glance, a moment of quiet joy, just a little longer. He smiled at her, and though he said nothing, he felt the truth settle inside him. He was not bending the world. He was listening to it. And the world in return was listening back, and so slowly he grew into his soft quirk of stretching time, not as a secret to guard, not as a power to boast, but as a gentle thread weaving through his days. In every hug he held, in every silence he shared, in every breath he listened to, he learned that time was not something to be conquered. It was something to be cherished, and perhaps that was enough. There are places in the world that hold memory the way cloth holds a scent, softly, invisibly, but unmistakably. For him, that place was the willow tree by the stream. Its branches, bent low, heavy with green, as though the tree itself wished to wrap the world in a quiet embrace. The roots reached deep into the soil, drinking from the water below, and the air there always seemed cooler, calmer, as if time moved more slowly in its shade. It was beneath this willow that so many of his childhood hours were stretched open. When the sun was bright, he would lie back against its trunk, listening to the way the wind combed through its long leaves. When rain came, he would sit tucked beneath its branches, dry and safe, while the stream sang louder with the weight of water. The tree was not just a tree, it was a companion, a keeper of secrets, a witness to the small unfolding of his days, and most often he was not alone. The girl with riddles loved the willow too. She would arrive with twigs in her hair and mud on her shoes, as though the world itself had trailed her into the clearing. She had a way of speaking that was never direct, questions tucked inside statements, answers hidden in questions. "If you close your eyes," she once told him, "the stream doesn't sound like water at all. It sounds like someone breathing very slowly. Do you hear it?" He had tilted his head, listening. And yes, if he listened just right, he did. They grew together in that way, her filling silence with strange words, him filling silence with the patience to listen. Sometimes they said little at all, and that too was enough. It wasn't that they understood each other completely, it was that they didn't need to. Presence was the language they shared, and the willow tree translated everything else. One afternoon, late in summer, she arrived carrying a small stone. She pressed it into his hand. "It's nothing," she said quickly, "but it made me think of you." He turned it over in his palm. It was smooth, round, the color of dusk. He didn't know why it mattered, but it did. He tucked it into his pocket and carried it with him for years, the weight of it a reminder that even simple things could be gifts. It was under the willow, too, that he learned the power of silence. The girl sometimes spoke of things he did not understand. Fears about her family, questions about the sky, the odd loneliness that tugged at her even when she was surrounded by people. He never had the right answers. He was still a child after all, and the world was too large for words to solve. But he had silence, and sometimes silence was enough. She would lean her head against the bark, eyes half closed, and he would sit beside her, saying nothing. The stream whispered, the branches swayed, and the silence stretched like a blanket around them. When she finally stood to leave, her steps seemed lighter, as though the silence had carried some of her weight for her. It was a lesson he would carry into the rest of his life, that not every pain needs an answer, not every question needs a reply. Sometimes the kindest thing one can offer is simply to remain. As the seasons turned, the willow seemed to change with them. In autumn, its leaves turned pale gold, scattering across the water like floating lanterns. In winter, the branches grew bare, skeletal against the grey sky, and the stream slowed beneath a fragile skin of ice. In spring, green unfurled again, and with it, the children's laughter. And in summer, the shade grew thick and forgiving, a perfect refuge from the sun. Through each season, the boy and the girl returned, carrying themselves back to the willow as though it were home. And the tree never failed them. But there was one day, softer than most, that lingered with him more than the others. They had been sitting in silence, their backs pressed to the same trunk, when the girl suddenly whispered, "Do you think trees remember us?" The question hung in the air, delicate and fragile. He thought of the way the branches creaked when he leaned against them, the way the roots seemed to shift around his feet, the way the willow always felt different when he returned. "Yes," he said finally, "I think they do." She smiled, her eyes glimmering in the slant of afternoon light. "Then I hope this one remembers us forever." And though he was too young to promise such things, he found himself nodding, believing with all his heart that the willow would never forget. Years later, when the girl's visits grew less frequent and the rush of life began tugging her elsewhere, the boy still returned, sometimes alone, sometimes with others, but always with the same reverence. He would place his hand against the bark, feeling the roughness beneath his skin, and he would listen, not with his ears but with the quiet inside him. And every time he swore he could feel the echo of laughter, of questions, of silences once shared. The willow remembered. And because it remembered, so did he. It became more than a childhood refuge. It became a mirror of himself, a reminder that even the quietest places hold stories, and that every whisper, no matter how small, leaves a trace. So when he thought of his strange gift, his ability to stretch moments, to make time linger, he realized it was not only something he carried within. The willow had it too. The tree, the stream, the stones beneath their feet, all of them held echoes. All of them stretched moments longer than they should last. Perhaps, he thought, that was the true gift of the world itself, to remember us gently, even when we move on. And so, in the hush of those childhood days, he learned that memories do not only live in people. They live in places, in trees, in the sound of water against stone. They live in whispers carried forward by the wind. And when he finally left the willow behind one evening, watching the sun dip low beyond the branches, he carried a certainty inside him, as steady as the stone in his pocket, that some places never let go of us, that some echoes once given never fade. There are lessons in life that do not arrive as lectures or stern corrections, but as small rituals repeated until they take root in the heart. For him, one of those lessons came in the form of sandwiches. His grandfather lived in a modest house at the edge of the town, a place that always smelled faintly of wood smoke and lavender. The garden out back was filled with vegetables, but the kitchen was where the boy felt most at home. The old man had a way of moving slowly, deliberately, as though each gesture carried meaning. He would take out the bread, thick and unevenly sliced, spread butter that glistened like pale gold, and lay a cheese or tomato with quiet precision. To anyone else they were simple sandwiches, but to the boy they were something more, because his grandfather never rushed. He never made food just to fill a stomach. Each slice of bread was handled with care, as though it deserved respect for the life that had grown it. He would pause between steps, humming softly under his breath, and the boy would notice how the air seemed to hold its breath with him, waiting for the ritual to unfold. One day, curious, the boy asked, "Why do you take so long?" His grandfather smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. "Because food isn't just food. It's time, it's love, it's memory. If you hurry, you miss the gift of it." The boy nodded, though he didn't fully understand. But he listened, as he always did, letting the words stretch inside him the way moments did. When the sandwiches were ready, they would carry them outside. His grandfather would set a cloth on the grass, and together they would sit beneath the open sky. The boy always noticed how his grandfather looked upward before taking a bite, as if acknowledging something beyond himself. Sometimes it was the stars, faint in the fading evening. Sometimes it was the drifting clouds. And one evening, as they sat there, his grandfather said, "Look closely, lad. When the butter catches the light, doesn't it look like stars?" The boy held up his sandwich, tilting it in the glow of sunset. The smooth surface shimmered faintly. Tiny sparkles caught in the spread. He laughed softly. "It does. Then remember," his grandfather said, taking a bite, "there are stars hidden in the simplest things, even here, between bread and butter." The boy never forgot that. It was not only sandwiches. His grandfather carried this reverence into everything. Sweeping the floor was an act of gratitude. Tending the garden was a prayer. Even sitting quietly by the fire carried weight, as though silence itself deserved honor. The boy, who already felt the strange softness of stretched moments, found in his grandfather's ways a kind of kinship. Here was someone who also lingered, who also listened. There was a night when the boy awoke restless, wandering out into the dark. He found his grandfather in the kitchen, a single candle burning on the table. The old man was making sandwiches. Again, though there was no reason to, no guests, no journeys planned, "Why now?" the boy asked, sleepy-eyed. His grandfather looked up, smiling gently. "Because sometimes the world feels heavy, and a sandwich reminds me that it's still gentle too." The boy sat beside him, watching the careful spreading of butter. He realized then that the ritual was not about food at all. It was about pausing, about giving weight to what others might overlook, about finding stars even in the ordinary. When the sandwiches were finished, his grandfather handed him one. The boy bit into it slowly, the taste simple, the moment vast, and now, in that small kitchen, by the glow of a single candle, he felt time stretch again, soft, forgiving, endless. His grandfather did not live forever, of course. No one does. But the sandwiches remained. Years later, long after the old man's chair sat empty, the boy, now growing toward youth, would find himself in the kitchen, butter knife in hand, repeating the motions exactly as he had been shown. Slow, careful, reverent. He would sit by the window, eating in silence, and he would remember. He realized then that this was legacy, not grand inheritances, not monuments, but quiet rituals passed from one heart to another. A way of being that outlives the person themselves. And though the boy did not yet have words for it, he felt it deep inside, that love often hides itself not in what is said, but in what is repeated, in bread, in butter, in the stars tucked secretly between them. That night, lying in his bed, he hummed softly as he often did, but this time he imagined his grandfather humming too, their voices carrying together across the still air. Perhaps, somewhere beyond the stars, the old man was listening. Perhaps he always would. And so the boy learned another truth, that even the smallest acts performed with care can echo like constellations across a lifetime. Some places are not just places. They are listeners, keepers, companions in disguise. For him, the river was one such friend. It flowed beyond the willow tree, curving lazily through fields before disappearing into the distance. By day it glimmered with light, carrying reflections of clouds and passing birds. By night it turned dark and secretive, whispering against the stones as though holding conversations only the water could understand. He often went there alone, his pockets filled with small treasures, smooth stones, bits of string, crumbled leaves. He would sit at the bank, knees pulled to his chest, and drop each thing into the current one by one. He imagined the river carrying them far away, into towns he had never seen, perhaps even into oceans he could only dream of. But each time he let something go, he felt as if the river gave something back, not in objects but in presence, in silence, in listening. Because that was what the river did best. It listened. He began to notice that when he spoke aloud, even in whispers, the water seemed to catch his words and carry them onward. "I feel lonely today," he said once, tossing in a pebble. The ripples spread outward as though nodding in sympathy. "I wish I could stretch the day longer," he murmured another time, and the current slowed slightly at the bank, as if leaning closer to hear. The girl with riddles noticed it too. She came with him one afternoon, crouching low by the water. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "What?" "The way it answers, not in words, but in feeling." He tilted his head, listening more carefully. And yes, there it was. A rhythm in the water that seemed to echo back whatever they gave it. When they laughed, the splashes were brighter. When they fell silent, the current hushed too. From that day, the river became more than a stream of water. It became a confidant. They whispered secrets into it, promises they didn't dare make aloud, questions that had no answers. The river never judged, never hurried them along. It received everything and returned it softened, as though the water itself had stretched the edges of their feelings until they could be carried more gently. There was one evening, late in autumn, when he sat alone by the riverbank. The leaves had fallen, swirling in the current like tiny boats. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke from distant chimneys. He leaned forward and whispered, "I miss him," thinking of his grandfather. For a moment, the water stilled near his hand. A leaf caught in an eddy circled slowly, as though waiting with him. Then the current moved again, carrying the leaf downstream, gently, carefully. He felt tears prick his eyes, but they did not sting. The sorrow stretched, itself thin, made lighter by the river's quiet reply. It was then he understood something important. The world itself could listen. Not just people, not just friends or family, but places, rivers, trees, even walls of old houses. They held echoes, just as he did. They remembered. The thought comforted him. It meant he was not alone, even in solitude. It meant that when he whispered into the air, something beyond him received it, and perhaps in some way carried it forward. The girl, when he told her, smiled knowingly. "That's what rivers are for," she said. "They take what you give and turn it into something else. Maybe into clouds, maybe into rain, maybe into new beginnings." He liked that idea. That word spoken into water might someday fall back, as rain in a faraway place. That his laughter might someday land on someone else's skin as a raindrop, unexpected and cooling. The boy began to treat the river as a kind of diary. He visited often, speaking softly, sometimes humming, sometimes just sitting in silence. He learned its moods, the fast rush of spring when the snow melted, the slow heaviness of summer, the brittle edge of winter ice. And always beneath those changes, there was the same steady rhythm, like a heart beating through the seasons. He realized something else too, that when he stretched time, the river stretched with him. If he lingered long enough, watching the current, minutes turned into hours without him noticing. If he listened closely, the sound of the water became more than sound. It became memory, carrying him back to every other visit, every word he had spoken there. One evening, under the pale wash of moonlight, he leaned over the water and whispered, "Thank you." He wasn't sure why, only that gratitude had swelled in him suddenly, uncontainable. The river shimmered back, scattering the moonlight into 1,000 fragments, and in that moment, he believed. Perhaps the river wasn't only listening. Perhaps it was speaking too. From then on, whenever he returned, he carried bread in his pocket, tossing small crumbs into the water. "For you," he would say, smiling. The girl laughed at his habit, but never mocked it. She too threw offerings, flowers, buttons, even once a folded note she refused to let him read. The river received it all without question, without haste. Years later, when he thought back on those childhood days, he realized the river had taught him one of his first truths, that listening is not about answering, but about holding, about creating space wide enough for feelings to flow through, softened by the current. And so the boy grew with the certainty that somewhere beyond words, the river was still carrying his echoes onward, carrying them to oceans, to rains, to strangers who might never know him yet, might feel a raindrop on their cheek that had once been his laughter. The river remembered, and in its memory, so did he. Every family carries a rhythm, like a song that each member hums without knowing. In his, the rhythm was steady, shaped in no small part by his older brother. The boy admired him from the beginning. His brother was not loud, not one to fill a room with words or laughter. Instead, he carried a quiet fire inside him, a warmth that did not flare or dazzle but burned steadily, like embers that never went out. In the mornings, when the house still felt half asleep, his brother was already awake, tending to small tasks without being asked. Carrying wood inside, helping their mother with chores, mending things with careful hands. He did not boast of these things, nor expect praise. They were simply the way he lived, quiet acts of care stitched into the fabric of each day. The boy, still small and learning, often followed him like a shadow. He watched how his brother tied knots in ropes, how he sharpened tools with slow patience, how he carried himself with a calm that seemed older than his years. Sometimes he asked questions, though more often he simply watched, and slowly by osmosis he learned. There was one evening that stayed with him more than most. A storm had rolled through heavy with thunder, shaking the windows of their home. The boy had woken afraid, his heart racing at each crash of lightning. He crept from his bed and found his brother sitting by the fire, its glow steady in the darkness. Without a word, his brother shifted, making room on the rug. The boy curled beside him, the storm still raging outside, but the warmth of the fire wrapping around them both. His brother didn't offer explanations or promises that the storm would pass. He didn't need to. The steady presence was enough. The boy's fear slowly eased, softened by the rhythm of flames and the closeness of someone who stayed. It was in moments like that he learned something essential, that love does not always arrive as grand gestures or dramatic words. Sometimes love is simply staying awake while another sleeps more peacefully. Sometimes love is carrying wood before anyone asks. Sometimes love is fire, quiet, glowing, steady. The brother never spoke much of feelings. He was not one for riddles, like the girl beneath the willow, nor for humming like the boy himself. His language was action, a mended shoe left quietly by the door, a hand placed on the boy's shoulder when he stumbled, a look of reassurance that carried more than any sentence could. Still, there were rare times when words slipped through. Once, while they sat outside beneath the stars, his brother said softly, "You see more than most, that's not easy." The boy turned to him, surprised. "Don't lose it," his brother continued, eyes fixed on the sky. "But don't let it make you lonely either. Fire needs air, you can't keep it closed up all the time." The boy thought about that long after, though he didn't fully understand it then. What he did understand was the comfort of knowing his brother saw him, not just the boy he was, but the way he stretched moments, the way he lingered where others hurried. As they grew older, their paths began to shift. The brother shouldered more responsibilities, his quiet fire called upon again and again. The boy sometimes missed him, wished for more time together, but even in absence he felt the warmth. It lingered, as though embers had been tucked into his own chest. One day in the stillness of late afternoon, the boy asked, "Why do you never complain?" His brother smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Because complaining doesn't make the work lighter. But fire does. If you keep a little warmth inside, you can carry anything." It was such a simple answer, yet it rooted itself in the boy's heart. Years later, whenever he faced burdens of his own, he would remember those words. He would remember that fire need not be loud or consuming. Sometimes it is enough for it to burn quietly, faithfully, giving warmth to whoever stands nearby. The bond between them was not one of constant conversation, nor of dramatic moments. It was built in the ordinary, shared chores, long silences by the fire, evenings walking home together without words. And perhaps that was what made it so steady. It did not need tending with constant effort. It lived like flame by simply existing. The boy realized in time that his brother's quiet fire had shaped him as deeply as the willow, as deeply as the river, as deeply as the sandwiches of stars. It taught him that strength does not always roar. Sometimes strength whispers, sometimes strength sits with you in the storm and says nothing at all. And when he looked back on his childhood years later, he did not remember specific sentences or long speeches. He remembered warmth. He remembered the glow of firelight reflected in his brother's steady eyes. He remembered the silence that did not feel empty but full, and he carried that fire forward, a steady ember in his chest, to keep for himself, and to share with others when their nights grew stormy. It began with a door he had never noticed before. The house where he grew up was not large, yet somehow it held small mysteries, a floorboard that creaked louder on rainy days, a window that hummed faintly in the wind, corners where dust gathered like old whispers. But this door was different. He found it one afternoon, half hidden behind a curtain in the hallway. It was narrow, painted the same color as the wall, almost as though it didn't want to be seen. He paused before it, sensing not urgency, but invitation. The handle was cool to the touch, and when he turned it, the door opened without resistance. Inside there was a stairwell leading downward, spiraling in slow circles. The air smelled faintly of wood and dust, yet not unpleasant. It was the smell, of time itself, layered and quiet. He descended carefully, one hand brushing the wall, until at last he reached a room. It was not a basement, nor a cellar. It was a library, shelves stretched upward into shadows, filled not with books alone but with objects, a jar of seashells, a rusted bell, a collection of letters tied with string, a child's shoe worn smooth by play. There were books, yes, but they were stacked alongside lanterns, photographs, and toys that looked as though they had belonged to no one he knew. The boy walked slowly, each step echoing softly. It felt like a place outside of time. The air was heavy with memory, though not his own, and yet as he touched the objects he felt flickers, tiny impressions, like echoes of lives once lived. He picked up a wooden toy horse. For a moment he saw a child laughing, pulling it on a string through a garden. He put it down gently, heart stirred by a tenderness for someone he would never meet. Another shelf held a music box. When he opened it, the faintest tune played, though some of the notes were missing. Still, the melody carried a sweetness like a lullaby half-remembered. It lingered in his chest long after he closed the lid. The boy did not understand whose library this was, or why it existed, but he knew instinctively that it was a place of safekeeping, a place where forgotten things came to rest, not lost, not discarded, but held with quiet reverence. As he wandered deeper among the shelves, he noticed something remarkable. Each forgotten thing seemed to resonate with him in a particular way. The jar of seashells made him think of afternoons by the river, even though he had never been to the sea. The old letters reminded him of the Willow Girl's riddles, folded like secrets only half revealed. The rusted bell carried an echo of storms, and the way his brother's presence steadied him through thunder. It was as though the library reflected not only forgotten lives, but his own memories too, woven together, blurred, shared. He sat at a small wooden table in the center of the room. Its surface bore scratches and ink stains, signs of use by countless unseen hands. He rested there, listening to the silence, and felt something he couldn't quite name, a mixture of awe, nostalgia, and peace. For the first time he realized that memory is not only what we hold within us, but also what drifts beyond us, lingering in the world itself. A laugh may fade from our lips, but it may echo still in the walls. A toy once loved may still carry the warmth of small hands. Forgotten does not mean gone. Forgotten simply means resting. The boy returned often to the library, though he told no one of it. It became a place of reflection. Sometimes, after a difficult day, he would descend to its shelves, touch an object, and feel steadied by the reminder that others had lived, struggled, and loved before him. Their echoes whispered, gently, "You are not alone." On one visit he discovered a book unlike the others. Its cover was blank, its pages empty. Yet when he opened it, faint words began to appear, words not written in ink but in something softer, like light itself. He read them slowly. To remember is to keep alive. To forget is to trust that life holds what we cannot carry. Both are forms of love. The boy closed the book and pressed it to his chest, his heart swelling with quiet wonder. He never tried to read it again, fearing the words might vanish. But he carried the memory of them with him, repeating them silently on nights when sleep felt far away. In time, the library became part of him, a hidden chamber in his own heart. Whenever he held on to something too tightly, he remembered the shelves and let it rest. Whenever he feared forgetting, he reminded himself that nothing truly disappears. Everything finds a place, whether in memory or in silence. And though the boy grew older, the door behind the curtain remained. Sometimes he returned, sometimes he only dreamed of it, but always it reminded him that life is a library too, filled with treasures that may slip from our grasp, yet still remain, safe and waiting, in the quiet corners of the world. It began, so faintly, he wondered if it was only his imagination. On quiet afternoons when the trees outside bent their branches in the slow rhythm of the breeze, he heard it, a thread of sound, almost like humming, not loud enough to follow, not clear enough to name, but soft, woven into the air. He first noticed it while lying in the grass near the river. The water moved lazily, carrying sunlight in scattered fragments, and the reeds whispered against each other. That was when he caught it, a few notes trembling and distant like a lullaby from far away. He sat up, listening carefully, but the moment he strained too hard, it slipped away. And so he learned something important, that this song was not meant to be chased. It was meant to be received gently with no effort at all. After that, he began to notice it everywhere, in the hollow sound of the wind through the fence, in the sigh of curtains swaying when the windows were open, in the hush of trees at dusk, as though the branches themselves were breathing. Always faint, always tender, like a voice leaning close but never quite speaking aloud. It was not the kind of melody one could hum back. It was softer than memory, lighter than thought, but whenever he heard it, his chest filled with a warmth that made the world feel suddenly more alive, as though everything was quietly singing to itself, waiting to be heard. One evening he told his brother about it. "Do you hear it too?" he asked, voice hushed, as though afraid the song might vanish if he spoke too loudly. His brother tilted his head, listening. The crickets were chirping and the wind moved gently through the leaves. After a moment his brother shook his head. "I don't hear anything, but you look different when you listen. Softer, like you're not here, but somewhere else. Vatui." Boy smiled, though he could not explain what it meant. Perhaps not everyone was meant to hear the song. Perhaps it came only to those who needed it. He didn't mind. The melody wasn't lonely, it was patient. It did not demand to be understood. It only wanted to be noticed. As weeks passed, the boy began to sense something else. The song was not random. It seemed to respond to him. When he was sad, it carried a gentle lift, like hands reaching to steady him. When he was joyful, it shimmered brighter, like laughter echoing in the sky. And when he was tired, it slowed, wrapping him in a rhythm that matched the weight of his eyelids. It was as if the song belonged to him, yet not only to him. A gift, but not a possession. One afternoon he returned to the library of forgotten things, hoping to find a clue. He wandered the shelves slowly, brushing his fingers across the dust, until he came upon another curious object, a small glass bottle with a cork stopper. Inside, though faint and invisible, he felt a vibration, like the tiniest fragment of sound trapped within. He uncorked the bottle carefully, and in that moment, a single note drifted out, clear and fragile, fading into the air. It was part of the same song he had been hearing. His heart trembled with recognition. On the bottle's label, written in faded ink, were 3 words: "Songs of the Wind." The boy pressed the bottle to his chest, eyes closing. He understood then that the song was not his alone. It was something the world carried, a lullaby passed through trees, rivers, stones, and air. It had been heard before, perhaps by many, and it would be heard again long after him. That thought did not make it less precious. It made it more so. From then on, whenever the boy walked home in the evening, he let the wind guide him. If it blew softly against his cheek, he slowed his steps. If it circled him playfully, he laughed and followed. If it grew still, he paused and breathed, letting silence sing its own music. Over time, he realized the song was teaching him something, how to listen, not with his ears alone, but with his whole self. To listen to people when their words faltered, to listen to places when they seemed empty, to listen to silence without rushing to fill it. And little by little, he found that the song stayed with him even when the wind was still. It became part of his own heartbeat, a quiet presence he carried everywhere. Sometimes at night he thought of how many others might be hearing their own melodies, hidden in the world around them. A woman in a far-off village, listening to waves against the shore. A man in the mountains, hearing the snow fall in hushed rhythms. A child somewhere, lulled by the creak of a rocking chair. Each of them connected, not by sight or touch, but by the simple truth that the world sings softly to anyone who chooses to listen. And in that thought, the boy felt less alone. The song was his companion, but it was also a bridge between him and the countless souls who in their own way were listening too. When he finally drifted to sleep at night, the melody followed him, softer still, until dreams carried it onward. And sometimes in those dreams, he almost believed he could see it, a thread of silver light weaving through the air, binding everything together. Not a song to be owned. Not a song to be finished, but a song that was always there waiting in the wind. The boy first saw the lanterns on a night when the air was colder than usual and the streets were wrapped in silence. He had been walking home, following the faint thread of the wind's song, when a glow appeared ahead of him. It was not the sharp light of lamps, nor the golden flicker of fire. It was something softer, warmer, as though light itself had learned how to breathe. One by one, lanterns appeared along the path, swaying gently in the breeze. They were not all the same. Some were shaped like circles, others like stars, others like teardrops. Each one carried its own small pulse of light, a rhythm that seemed alive, as though each lantern held a memory tucked carefully inside it. Curious, the boy followed the glow to its source. At the end of the street stood a small workshop, tucked between two tall, crumbling buildings. Its windows were lined with glass jars, each glowing faintly from within. Above the door hung a sign, hand-painted in soft strokes, "The Lantern Maker." He hesitated before stepping inside, but the moment he did, warmth surrounded him, gentle, steady, like a blanket placed across tired shoulders. The room was filled with lanterns of every kind. Some dangled from the ceiling, some lined the walls, and some sat quietly on the floor waiting to be lifted. Their glow was not blinding but tender, like candlelight in a dream. Behind a wooden table sat an old woman, her hands steady as she shaped thin paper around a delicate frame. Her eyes lifted when she noticed the boy, and though she said nothing, at first her gaze was kind, like a lantern itself, glowing without needing to explain. "You've found me," she said at last, her voice slow and hushed. "Or perhaps the light found you." The boy stepped closer, fascinated by the lanterns around him. "They're beautiful," he whispered, "but they feel different. Like they're alive." The woman smiled. "In a way, they are. Each lantern carries a piece of someone's warmth, a memory, a hope, sometimes even a sorrow that has been softened into light." She lifted a small lantern and placed it in his hands. It was round, glowing with a quiet amber tone. The boy felt his chest tighten, because the glow did. Not just shine, it spoke. Not in words, but in feeling. He felt the warmth of a mother's embrace, the hush of lullabies sung in the dark, the safety of being held. His eyes stung with tears. The woman saw his expression and nodded gently. This one was made from a memory of being loved. Lanterns. Like these remind us of what never truly leaves, even when people do. The boy held the lantern closer, letting its glow sink into him. He did not ask how it was made, or whether such magic could be explained. He knew instinctively that it was not about explanation. It was about care. "Would you like to make one?" the woman asked. He hesitated. "Could I? Even if I don't know how?" She placed her tools on the table, thin bamboo sticks, sheets, of paper soft as breath, a small bowl of oil that shimmered faintly. "You already know how," she said. "All you need is a memory that glows." The boy thought for a long while. He thought of his brother, laughing at a joke neither of them had finished. He thought of the wind song wrapping him in sound when he felt alone. He thought of his father's hands, placing bread on the table, simple and steady, every morning. Chose one, the memory of sitting with his brother on a hill at dusk, watching the sky turn violet. They hadn't spoken much, but they hadn't needed to. Their silence had been a kind of music. He closed his eyes, breathing it in again. When he opened them, the paper in his hands glowed faintly, catching the shape of that memory. Slowly, carefully, he folded it into place, letting it become part of the lantern's body. When it was finished, the woman lit the wick inside. The lantern glowed with a soft purple hue, almost like twilight itself. The boy's heart swelled. It was as though he had bottled a moment of love and carried it into the present. The woman watched him quietly, then spoke. "Lanterns do not erase darkness, but they remind us we do not have to walk through it alone. That is their gift." The boy nodded. He understood. As he prepared to leave, she gave him a small lantern of his own to carry, a simple one, glowing, gently enough to light his steps. "Take it with you," she said, "not because you need it, but because it will remind you that warmth can be carried. Even the smallest glow can guide you through nights that feel endless." The boy held the lantern close as he stepped back into the evening. The wind stirred, gently, and the song he always listened for was there again. Only now it seemed to harmonize with the glow in his hands. As he walked, he realized something. Light and song were not so different. Both were gifts the world offered, not to dazzle or overwhelm, but to remind him softly, tenderly, that he was not alone. That night he placed the lantern by his bedside. Its glow was steady, not bright, a patient companion as his eyes drifted, closed, and as he fell asleep, he dreamed of a sky filled with lanterns floating upward like stars that had learned the art of tenderness. The path after the lantern workshop led him to a part of town he had never noticed before. The streets curved strangely, as though they were folding in on themselves, and the air grew hushed, almost reverent. Even the wind's song seemed quieter, here as though it were listening too. At the end of the lane stood a building that looked more like a whisper than a house. Its walls shimmered faintly, catching the dim light of dusk. It was neither glass nor stone, but something in between, a material that seemed to hold memories within its surface. Above the doorway, etched in simple letters, was a single word. Mirrors. The boy stepped inside, lantern in hand. The air was cool still. Around him stood dozens of tall mirrors, each framed in silver wood that looked as though it had grown naturally from the ground. They faced different directions, leaning in slight tilts, some tall, some wide, some broken along their edges. And yet not a single one showed a reflection of his face. Instead, each mirror shimmered with something else. The first mirror he approached rippled like water. When he peered into it, he did not see his body at all. Instead, he saw the shape of himself. As a child, small hands holding a wooden toy. His younger self was laughing, not the quiet, careful laugh he often carried now, but a full, bubbling one, unashamed and free. The boy reached out to touch the mirror, and the younger version of himself looked up, as though sensing him. Their eyes met, and for a moment he felt the warmth of remembering who he had been before the world had grown heavier. Then the image dissolved, the mirror returning to stillness. The second mirror glowed faintly with a pale light. When he looked into it, he saw his brother's face, soft, familiar, smiling gently. The boy's heart ached. It was not exactly a memory, not exactly real, but something in between, a reflection of love echoing across time. His brother lifted a hand in the mirror as though in greeting. The boy's throat tightened. He whispered hello. Though he knew, the glass could not speak back. He stepped onward. Other mirrors showed him quiet things, the sound of footsteps in an empty hall, the hush of someone humming while they cooked, the shadow of a tree he used to climb. Some reflected moments he had forgotten, moments too small to seem important then, but which now glowed with quiet meaning. One mirror startled him. It showed him not as he was, nor as he had been, but as he might one day be, taller, older, with streaks of silver in his hair. The older version of himself sat beneath a tree, eyes closed, listening to the same wind's song. There was peace on that face, the kind of peace that does not arrive quickly but grows slowly, carefully over years. The boy leaned closer, studying the lines on that older face. They did not look heavy. They looked softened, as though life had carved kindness into him instead of hardness. He breathed slowly, letting the image sink into him. Behind him, a voice spoke, not startling but soft, like a thought made audible. "Mirrors are not meant to judge you," the voice said. "They are meant to remind you." He turned. An old man stood in the far corner of the hall, cloaked in shadow but glowing faintly, as though the mirrors lent him their light. His eyes were steady, kind, reflective. "Remind me of what?" "The," boy asked quietly. The man stepped closer, placing a hand on one of the mirrors. "Of the ways you have been many selves, a child, a brother, a wanderer, a listener. You are not one thing alone, you are all of them, and none have vanished. They live here within you even now." The boy touched the mirror nearest to him, where the image of his laughing childhood self had once been. "But what if I forget them? What if I lose them?" The old man shook his head gently. "You cannot lose what has already shaped you. Even in forgetting, you are carrying. Memory is not always about holding, sometimes it is about being held." The boy felt tears press at his eyes, but he let them come, quiet as rain. The man guided him to a final mirror at the far end of the hall. Unlike the others, it did show his reflection, yet it was not only his body he saw. Around him shimmered faint lights, faint shapes of those who had touched his life, his brother's laughter, the lantern woman's warmth, even the wind itself, curling around him like a friend. He saw himself not alone, but woven into a tapestry of every bond, every kindness, every soft moment that had carried him this far. The boy exhaled, long and steady. When he turned to thank the old man, the corner was empty. Only the mirrors remained, glowing faintly in the silence. He left the house with slow steps, his lantern glowing softly in his hand. For the first time, he did not feel the need to ask what it all meant. He understood that some truths were not meant to be explained, but simply carried, like light, like song, like memory. And as he walked into the night, the mirrors seemed to linger within him, not as glass but as presence. Each step he took felt accompanied, as though pieces of himself walked beside him, keeping him whole. That night, before sleep, he whispered to the quiet air, "I am many. And I am still becoming." The words did not echo, but they did not need to. They stayed with him, a soft reflection in his chest, glowing as steadily as the lantern by his bed. The road curved softly away from the house of mirrors, leading him into a quieter part of the town, where even the lamps seemed to dim themselves as though respecting the hush. His lantern cast a circle of gold across cobblestones, and each step felt like it was leading him deeper, not into distance, but into memory. Soon the path ended at an arched gate, half hidden beneath ivy. Its wooden frame was worn but alive, pulsing faintly with a warmth that made him pause. A weathered sign hung just above, "The Garden of Forgotten Things." The boy hesitated. Forgotten things. He wondered if stepping through meant he would have to face pieces of himself he had lost, perhaps pieces he had meant to let go. But then the wind, faithful as ever, gave a gentle nudge at his back, almost like a friend's hand. And so he pushed. The gate open. Inside, the world breathed differently. The garden stretched endlessly, though he sensed it was not bound by ordinary space. Flowers glowed in muted colors, not bright but steady, lavender that hummed with faint notes, pale roses that carried scents of childhood kitchens, sunflowers that leaned gently as though bowing in greeting. But beneath the flowers lay something stranger still, objects half buried in the soil, each cradled as tenderly as roots cradle seeds. He bent to look closer. A tiny wooden whistle lay beneath a vine. When he picked it up, the memory bloomed instantly. He was 6 again, sitting under the great tree with his brother. both of them laughing between shrill, uneven notes of their whistles. He could almost hear the clumsy little tune again, as if the memory had been planted in the soil and grown into music. The boy set the whistle back down carefully, whispering thanks. Further along, he saw a shoe too small for his current feet, its leather worn but polished by time. Touching it filled him with the memory of his first day in the town square, holding his mother's hand nervously while strangers bustled around. He had been so small, so uncertain, yet so eager to belong. Everywhere he looked, forgotten things revealed themselves. A broken teacup that had once been his grandmother's favorite, a scrap of paper with a doodle from a classroom he barely remembered, a string that had once tied the handle of a gift bag. Ordinary things, tiny, fragile, unremarkable to anyone else, but to him, they were anchors to entire worlds of feeling. The boy realized slowly that this garden was not meant to hold grand artifacts. It was made of the kind of memories one usually loses in the corners of life. The kind you don't write down, the kind you only recall when a scent or a sound or the turn of a season brushes them awake. He felt his chest ache with both loss and wonder. At the far end of the path stood a woman tending the garden with slow, deliberate movements. She wore robes the color of dusk, her hands dirt-stained yet graceful as she pressed small objects into the soil, covering them gently as though planting seeds. "Who are you?" the boy asked softly, not wanting to disturb the stillness. She looked up, her eyes kind, her smile faint. "I am only the gardener," she said. "I keep what is dropped along the way. Not everything that falls should vanish." He stepped closer. "Are these mine?" "Some are yours," she said. "Some belong to others who have walked here before you. The garden does not separate. Memories once planted belong to the earth, and to all who visit." The boy's eyes roamed over the glowing blooms again, realizing that perhaps the laugh he heard or the scent he smelled might not always be his own. Perhaps he was brushing against lives he had never lived but could still feel. The woman pressed a folded paper into the soil. "Forgetting," she continued, "is not always loss. Sometimes it is the soul's way of laying down what it cannot carry every day, but nothing is truly gone. It rests here, and when you are ready, you may visit as you have now." He thought of all the times he had tried so hard to remember, forcing himself to cling to details. Maybe forgetting wasn't failure. Maybe it was trust that the garden would hold things safe until he returned. The boy knelt beside a small patch of flowers. Among them lay a marble, smooth and blue. The moment he touched it, tears came without warning. It was the marble his brother had once given him, pressed into his palm before they went separate ways one summer evening. "Keep it," his brother had said then, "so you don't forget me when I'm not around." The boy closed his fist around it, the memory surging through him with such warmth it almost hurt. When he opened his hand again, the marble glowed faintly before sinking back into the soil, as though the garden knew it belonged here, still, and safe. The gardener's voice softened. "Do you see now? Nothing is lost. Everything finds a place." The boy wiped his cheeks and nodded. "Yes, I see." She smiled, placing a gentle hand over his lantern. "Carry this with you. But no, you do not have to hold everything all the time. The garden will keep it for you patiently until you return again." He bowed his head, a quiet gratitude filling him. As he walked back toward the gate, the flowers leaned in his direction, almost like farewells. He wondered if they did this, for everyone or just for him, but then decided it didn't matter. Some mysteries are more beautiful when left unanswered. Outside, the air of the night met him again. His lantern burned softly, but inside his chest burned another light. The reassurance that forgetting did not mean losing. That every small moment, every quiet joy, every fleeting kindness was still alive somewhere, blooming in the garden's soil. And with that thought, his steps felt lighter, as though he had been allowed to set down a burden he had carried without realizing it. That night, when he lay down beneath the stars, he closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Nothing is lost. Everything finds a place." And as sleep came, he dreamed of a garden where forgotten things glowed forever, waiting like flowers for him to return. The morning came not with a blaze of sunlight, but with a mist that clung to the air, silver and cool. The boy awoke beside the cobblestone path, stretching softly as though he too were part of the mist. His lantern still glowed faintly, but the flame within it no longer felt urgent. It pulsed quietly, almost as if it knew the boy's heart had grown steadier. He walked on, letting the hush of dawn guide him. Soon he heard it, the sound of running water. It was not the rush of a fierce river, nor the trickle of a timid stream. It was something in between, steady and certain, like the breathing of the earth itself. Drawn to it, he followed the sound, until the trees parted, and there it was, a river of glass winding endlessly, reflecting not only the sky but something deeper. The surface shimmered with faint ripples, and though the boy could see his own face there, he also saw shadows of other faces, laughing, crying, whispering, passing like reflections caught between layers of time. He knelt at the bank, dipping his fingers into the cool water. The moment his skin touched it, a memory swelled inside him, not his own but as vivid as if it were. A little girl chasing after a kite in a meadow, her laughter ringing like bells. Then, just as suddenly, the image dissolved. The boy gasped softly. The river carried memories. He cupped water in his hands, lifted it, and sipped. The taste was unlike anything he had known. Not sweet, not bitter, but alive. And with each sip, another memory drifted through him. An old man watching the sunset with his dog. A mother humming as she wove cloth by candlelight. A child clutching a blanket on their first night away from home. None of these belonged to him, yet he felt them all, like borrowed warmth. A voice spoke from across the river, low and steady. The river remembers what people forget. The boy looked up and saw a man sitting upon a stone. His hair was long and silver, his eyes clouded but gentle, as though he had been listening to the river for countless years. He carried no lantern, no pack, only a wooden staff worn smooth by time. "Are these everyone's memories?" the boy asked. The man nodded slowly. "All who live, all who breathe, all who dream, leave pieces of themselves here. The river gathers them. Some come from long ago, some from yesterday. It does not choose, it only remembers." The boy's chest stirred with wonder. "Then, why am I here? What should I do with them?" The man smiled faintly. "Drink when you are thirsty. Listen when you are weary, but do not try to carry them all. The river belongs to itself. If you try to hold it, you will drown, but if you let it flow, it will carry you too." The boy let these words settle into him like stones at the bottom of a stream. He gazed again into the river, watching as memories drifted past, some ordinary, some luminous, some unbearably tender. A woman saying goodbye at a train station, a boy giving away the last piece of his bread, a hand held quietly during an illness. Each moment was so small, yet the river made them endless. The boy asked softly, "Does the river remember me?" The man lifted his staff and tapped the water. Ripples spread, and soon an image surfaced. The boy saw himself much younger, standing on tiptoe to reach a window, watching rain slide down the glass while he hummed a tune he barely remembered knowing. The sight pierced him. He had not thought of that day in years. He hadn't realized he had lost it. And yet here it was, safe, as though the river had been saving it for him all this time. His eyes burned with tears, but not the kind that hurt. The man's voice softened. "Yes, you are here too. The river forgets no one." The boy sat by the bank watching the current. Time lost its shape. It could have been hours, or only minutes, but with each ripple, each passing image, he felt himself loosening, as though knots in his chest were slowly untying. At last the man stood, leaning on his staff. "I will leave you here. The river is a good teacher, but it is best listened to in silence." "Wait," the boy said, rising to his feet. "Will I see you again?" The man's smile was like a fading candle, small, soft, but steady. "Perhaps, or perhaps you will only hear me in the water." With that he turned and walked into the mist, his figure dissolving until the boy was alone again. Alone, but not lonely. He sat by the water's edge until dusk. He did not try to remember. He did not try to forget. He simply let the river flow, carrying all things, keeping all things. When night fell and the stars began to shimmer, the boy dipped his hands one last time, whispering a promise into the water. "Thank you for holding what I cannot. The river shimmered in reply, as though the stars themselves had nodded in agreement. That night, when he closed his eyes, he dreamed not of one life but of many, threads of laughter, of tears, of whispers, all flowing together into something vast, something endless. And in that dream he finally understood. To live was not only to keep, but also to let flow. The boy traveled farther after the river, carrying with him not the weight of the memories he had seen, but the quiet comfort that they existed, safe in the current never lost. The mist lifted as he walked, giving way to a coastline where the air tasted faintly of salt, and gulls drifted slowly across the pale sky. The shore stretched wide and hushed, as though it had been waiting for him alone. His lantern glowed faintly against the wind, and with each step he left small prints in the sand that the tide would soon erase. He didn't mind. After all, he thought, perhaps the sea would remember, the way the river had. In the distance he saw it, a tall, slender tower rising from a cliff shaped like a lighthouse. But there was no fire at its top, no burning lantern, no beam sweeping across the sea. Instead, it pulsed faintly with something softer, a glow like moonlight caught in glass. Curiosity guided his steps toward it. The closer he came, the more he felt a presence, not heavy, not frightening, but like being near a great silence that could listen to anything. When he reached the base of the lighthouse, he saw words carved into its stone. For those who seek, light even where there is none. The boy placed his hand on the cold wall and pushed open the weathered door. It creaked softly, as though sighing at his arrival. Inside, the spiral staircase stretched upward into shadow. He began to climb, each step echoing gently as if the tower was humming back his rhythm. The higher he went, the softer the air became, until it no longer smelled of salt, but of something older, dust, parchment, candle wax long extinguished. And then at last he reached the top. The chamber was round and open, filled not with fire but with shelves upon shelves of glass jars. Each jar glowed faintly, like a lantern holding the memory of a star. He stepped closer to one and saw within the glass not a flame but a scene. A little boy holding his grandfather's hand, walking through a forest at dusk. The boy gasped. This was no ordinary light. These jars were memories just like the rivers, but here they had been chosen, preserved, kept safe. As he turned slowly, he saw hundreds, thousands of these lights. Some flickered softly, some glowed steady, and some were dim as though almost forgotten. The whole room shimmered with them, a galaxy made not of stars, but of lives. A voice rose from the shadows, calm and deep. The river remembers everything, but the lighthouse chooses what to keep. The boy turned. From the far side of the chamber, a woman stepped forward. She was dressed in robes of grey and white, her hair long and unbound, her eyes filled with a stillness that seemed both ancient and young. She carried no lantern, for the room itself was her light. "Who are you?" the boy whispered. She smiled faintly. "A keeper. That is all. My task is not to create light, but to guard it." She gestured toward the shelves. "Each of these is a memory that once passed through the river, chosen by the sea to be kept here. Not all memories remain forever, but some are too important to fade." The boy's chest stirred with wonder. "Do you choose which ones?" She shook her head gently. "No. The lighthouse itself decides. I only tend the flame that is not a flame." The boy wandered among the jars, peering into them with reverent awe. He saw a child taking her first steps, stumbling into her mother's arms. He saw an artist finishing a painting in silence, tears rolling down their face as though the canvas had answered a question they had carried for years. He saw two friends sitting on a rooftop, sharing bread and secrets under the stars. So simple, so small, and yet so bright. He turned to the woman. Do I have a light here too?" She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Perhaps. Do you wish to see?" The boy hesitated, his hand tightening around his lantern. He wasn't sure. To see his own light here meant knowing what the world thought worth keeping. Would he be ready for that? The woman seemed to read his silence. Not every light is meant to be seen by its owner. Some are better kept secret, glowing quietly in The dark. Sometimes the most beautiful memories are the ones we do not realize we've given. Her words settled in him like a tide filling an empty shell. He thought of his mother's lullaby, of his laughter with the brother of the wind, of the warmth he felt at the river when he saw his forgotten childhood face. Maybe those lights were here. Maybe they didn't need to be. Instead of asking for his own, he whispered, "Can I leave one behind?" The woman's smile deepened, warm and approving. Yes, that is the true purpose of this place. She guided him to an empty jar, clear and still. "Close your eyes," she said softly. "Think of a moment you wish to give away. Not to keep, but to share with the world." The boy closed his eyes. He thought of the river's song, of how it had shown him lives not his own, of how he had whispered gratitude into its current. He thought of that promise. "Thank you for holding what I cannot." When he opened his eyes, the jar glowed faintly, a soft and steady light. The woman lifted it, placed it on a shelf, and bowed her head. "There," she murmured. "It will shine. Here for as long as it wishes." The boy gazed at it, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. It wasn't about what he kept, he realized. It was about what he gave. The woman turned toward the window of the tower, where the sea stretched endlessly. Below, the jars reflected in the glass, making the ocean look as though it too had stars within it. "One day when you are far from here, you may forget this moment. But the lighthouse will not. It will keep your gift, and someone else, someday, may find warmth in it." The boy whispered, "Thank you." She did not answer, only placed her hand gently on his shoulder, and for a moment the silence between them was its own kind of flame. That night, as he descended the stairs and stepped back into the sea air, he looked once more at the tower. It stood against the horizon, glowing softly, like a guardian of all that must not be lost. And as he walked away, the thought settled in him like a lullaby. The world remembers in ways we cannot see. Our kindness leaves a light, even if we never return to it. He smiled faintly, carrying the glow inside him, and with that, the boy walked on. The boy's path curved inland once more, away from the sea and its tireless whispers. The air grew softer, carrying the scent of blossoms he could not name, the kind that bloom only when the world grows quiet enough to notice them. He followed a winding road lined with pale stones until he saw rooftops rising gently in the distance. It was not like any village he had ever known. Instead of smoke from chimneys, there were ribbons of mist that curled like sighs. Instead of dogs barking or carts clattering or children shouting, the town seemed wrapped in a hush so deep it felt like stepping into a dream. At first he thought it silent, but then as he walked closer, he realized he could hear it, soft tones, low and silver, floating through the air, a music without instruments, steady as breath. The sound came from the houses themselves, where small bronze bells hung from every roof, every doorway, every lamppost. They swayed not in the wind, for there was little wind here, but in response to footsteps, whispers, or even thoughts unspoken. The bells sang not with noise, but with calm. Their voices were like lullabies poured into metal, carrying sleep deeper than sleep, peace deeper than peace. He stepped across the threshold of the village, and immediately the bells above him chimed once, gently, as though greeting him by name. A warmth ran through his chest, and his lantern flickered with approval. The people of the village moved slowly, as though each action were a kind of prayer. They carried baskets of fruit, folded linens, tended small gardens, yet none spoke above a murmur. Still, no silence was empty here. Every pause was filled with the chiming of bells, soft and constant, weaving the town into one long cradle song. A woman approached him, her smile tender, her voice no louder than a sigh. "You are a traveler," she said. "Yes," the boy replied. Even his own words seemed to hush themselves, falling into the rhythm of the place. She gestured for him to follow, and he did. She led him into a square at the village's heart. In the center stood a great wooden post, taller than the houses, strung with countless bells of every size. Some were small enough to fit in a palm, others larger than his head, their metal dark with age. Together they swayed slowly, creating a harmony that seemed older than the world. "This," the woman whispered, "is the Tower of Rest. Each bell is tuned to a memory, a wish, or a sorrow. When one enters the village, the bells choose how to answer. The boy looked up at them entranced. He thought he could almost hear words inside the tones, though too faint to grasp. The woman placed her hand on his shoulder. "Would you like to leave your sound here?" The boy hesitated. He had left a memory behind at the lighthouse, and it glowed there in its jar like a star he would never see again. What sound, he wondered, did he carry now? She pressed a small bell into his palm. It was simple, unpolished, its edges rough, but when he closed his fingers around it, it hummed faintly as though recognizing him. "Climb," she said softly, pointing to the wooden ladder that wound up the post. "Hang it where your heart tells you." The boy climbed carefully, each rung creaking beneath his feet. Halfway up, he paused to steady himself, but as he did, he realized the bells around him chimed in encouragement, soft, reassuring notes that eased his worry. He climbed higher until he found an empty space between two worn, quiet bells. It felt right. He hung his own there, letting it dangle gently in the still air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as he placed his hand on it, it gave a single, pure note. The sound traveled not outward but inward, as though it had rung inside his chest. Below, the villagers bowed their heads. The woman who had greeted him whispered, "Your sound has joined the village." The boy climbed down, his heart lighter. As he reached the ground, the bells above him all gave a soft, answering chime, as though welcoming the newcomer among them. That evening, he sat with the villagers in the square. They shared warm bread, fruits that glistened like jewels, and a tea that tasted of rain and sunlight at once. No one raised their voice. Instead, they let the bells carry the spaces between words. An old man beside him leaned closer. His voice was gravel-soft yet gentle. "Do you know why we live this way, child?" The boy shook his head. "Because the world is often too loud," the man said. "Not with sound, but with weight. Thoughts pressing in, fears pressing down. The bells remind us that even the smallest sound held gently can bring rest. We hang our sorrows here too, and the bells transform them into lullabies." The boy felt a tremor inside him, the echo of things he had carried for so long. His loneliness, his questions, the silence of those who could no longer answer him. Could those too become music? As the night deepened, the villagers lay down in their homes, yet no house was silent. Every door, every roof, every window sang in hushed notes as the wind shifted through. The whole village slept within a choir, a dream spun into sound. The boy lay beneath a tree, the lantern resting beside him, its glow mingling with the bell's shimmer. He closed his eyes, listening to the village's heartbeat, and in that half-sleep he dreamed, not of adventure, not of roads ahead, but of a soft bed where bells whispered his name, and he belonged not as a visitor, but as part of the song. Before dawn, the bells chimed once more softly as though bidding him farewell. He rose, his body rested, his heart at ease. The woman returned to him with a smile. "Your sound will remain here," she said. "Whenever you are weary, remember, the bells carry your rest." The boy bowed his head, whispering thanks, and as he walked onward, lantern in hand, he thought of the soft truth he had learned. Sometimes the world does not need us to speak louder. Sometimes it only asks us to ring gently and let our sound become part of the lullaby of others. The road stretched before him, and the bells lingered in his heart like a song that never ends. And with that he continued. The boy's steps carried him beyond the chiming bells, past fields where the air grew heavier, as though soaked in memory. His lantern glowed in a steady rhythm, guiding him along a narrow path that wove between mossy stones. The world here felt neither fully day nor fully night. Shadows softened at the edges, and light seemed to rise from the ground itself, tender and subdued. At last he came upon a gate, made not of wood or iron, but of woven vines, green and silver. It arched above him like the entrance to a dream. Hanging from the gate was a sign etched in faint letters, "The garden where time rests." The boy touched the gate. It opened without a sound, the vines parting like a curtain. Beyond lay a garden unlike any he had ever known. Flowers stretched in endless varieties, some small as raindrops, others tall as his shoulders. But their arrangement was strange. One patch bloomed in the colors of childhood toys, bright reds, yellows, and blues, as if painted by a child's laughter. Another bed held flowers faded and pale, their petals trembling like old parchment. Farther on, blossoms opened and closed with slow breaths, timed not by the sun but by something unseen. It was a place where memory grew in petals. As he walked, the boy noticed that each flower seemed alive with feeling. A crimson rose pulsed, with joy radiating the echo of a birthday long past. A cluster of white lilies whispered a soft sorrow, their fragrance like the touch of a farewell. One vine held blossoms of many colors all at once, joy and grief twined together, inseparable. At the center of the garden stood a tree. Its trunk was wide, its bark veined with light. From its branches hung blossoms shaped like hourglasses, each petal a fragment of time. Some shone brightly, others dimmed as though nearly forgotten. Beneath the tree sat a figure, an old gardener with silver hair that fell around him like moonlight. He looked up as the boy approached, his eyes kind, yet carrying centuries within them. "Welcome," the gardener said softly, his voice deep as soil. "You've come to the place where hours sleep and years grow roots." The boy bowed his head politely. "What is this garden?" The gardener brushed his hand across the ground where a small flower opened at his touch. "This is where the forgotten find form. Every joy, every sorrow, every moment unguarded. They settle here, sprout and bloom. Some remain brief as daisies, others endure like oak." The boy gazed at the blossoms, his chest tightening. "Does everyone have flowers here?" "Yes," the gardener replied, "though most will never see them. They walk through life carrying scents they cannot name, touched by blossoms they will never touch. But you are a traveler between waking and dream. You may walk this ground." The boy stepped closer to the tree, drawn by the blossoms shaped like hourglasses. "What happens if someone touches them?" The gardener's eyes softened. "They remember." With trembling fingers, the boy reached toward a flower glowing faintly with golden light. As he brushed it, a vision filled him, not of himself, but of someone else. He saw a mother sitting by a window, humming softly while a child played at her feet. The sound was warm, steady, and filled with love. Then the vision faded, leaving only the faint perfume of that memory. The boy looked at his hand. It still trembled. "It wasn't mine." The gardener nodded. "Not all blooms belong to you. Some moments drift when left unheld. The garden keeps them safe until the world needs them again." For a time they walked together among the blossoms. The gardener told him of flowers that bloomed only once a century, holding the memory of forgotten stars. He showed him blossoms that wilted quickly, carrying fleeting joys. Laughter by a riverbank, a smile in passing, the warmth of a shared meal. At one bed, the boy stopped. A cluster of pale blue flowers trembled in the soft air. They glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Something in them felt achingly familiar. The gardener watched him carefully. "They're yours." The boy knelt, his chest aching. He touched one, and the world dissolved around him. He was small again, bare feet on wooden floors, chasing shadows in the glow of lantern light. A hand ruffled his hair. A voice murmured his name. He didn't recall every detail, but he remembered the feeling, safety. The knowledge that even when storms rattled the windows, someone's presence anchored him. Tears gathered in his eyes as the memory faded, leaving him with the scent of those blue flowers. The gardener placed a hand on his shoulder. "Some flowers belong to your beginning. Some belong to your becoming. All belong to your journey." The boy whispered, "What happens when the flowers die?" The gardener smiled, a sadness in the curve of his lips. "They do not die. They return to the soil, and their fragrance lingers in the world, carried on winds you cannot see. That is why a song can move you though you've never heard it, why a face can feel familiar though you've never met." The garden breathes itself back into life. The boy sat beneath the great tree, the lantern beside him glowing faintly in rhythm with the blossoms above. For the first time in a long while, he felt no urgency, no need to move forward. He let himself rest, surrounded by the colors of forgotten time. As night deepened, fireflies drifted through the garden, their glow mingling with the blossoms. The boy closed his eyes, and listened to the silence. But it was not empty silence. It was full, alive, breathing with the memories of countless lives. When he awoke, dawn was a gentle haze over the vines. The gardener was tending a patch of flowers, humming softly. "It is time for you to go," the old man said without looking up. The boy rose slowly. "Will my flowers remain?" "They will," the gardener answered. "They will bloom, fade, and bloom again, carrying your moments into the world's heart. And when you return here one day, they will greet you." The boy picked up his lantern and bowed deeply. The gardener placed a final flower in his hand, a small white blossom, delicate, its scent faint but pure. "A gift," he said, "to remind you that even time rests when it must." The boy held it carefully as he stepped through the vine gate once more. Behind him, the garden shimmered softly, fading into the morning mist as though it had folded itself back into dream, and he walked onward, his heart carrying the fragrance of memories that would never truly be lost. The path beyond the vine gate wound into a stretch of land where the air itself seemed to blur. The boy walked slowly, lantern in hand, though its glow was softer now, dimmed by the lingering perfume of the garden. The world felt altered, less solid, as if carved from mist and memory. At first he thought he was alone, but after a while he noticed it, a presence not close enough to alarm but not distant enough to ignore. It moved when he moved, paused when he paused. A silence followed him, and in that silence something listened. The boy turned once, twice, yet saw nothing but the fading outlines of trees and the faint shimmer of mist rising from the earth. Still he felt it, the quiet weight of unseen company. "Who are you?" he whispered, though he wasn't certain whom he addressed. For a moment nothing answered. Then gently the ground stretched his shadow longer than it should have been. It rippled against the mist, pulling itself free from his feet like smoke uncoiling. Slowly it rose, not menacing, not harsh, but soft, like a memory taking form. A figure stood before him, shaped in his likeness but shaded in twilight, its edges blurred and its face carried no features, yet its posture mirrored his own. The boy's breath caught. His first thought was fear, but the figure did not move toward him. It only tilted its head as if waiting. He lifted his lantern, and the glow spilled across the shadow's form. To his surprise, it did not shrink or vanish. Instead, it seemed to grow steadier, as though the light made it more whole. "Are you me?" the boy asked softly. The figure shifted, a faint echo of his own breath rippling through its chest. It didn't speak with words, but somehow the boy understood. Not you, not a part, not other, not gone. The boy lowered the lantern, his pulse slowing. "Then what are you?" The shadow's form bent gently, and the boy sensed the answer forming, in the silence. "I am the part that waits, the part you leave behind, the part that remembers." A strange calm settled over him. He thought of the garden of time, of flowers that held forgotten hours. Was this figure one of his own, an echo born from moments unclaimed, or was it something larger, a companion to all who wander? The shadow stepped forward, its feet not touching the ground, but gliding across it. The boy held still, but when it drew near, he felt no coldness. Instead, he felt warmth, like the comfort of sitting beside a fire. It reached out, not a hand exactly, but the shape of one, and touched his chest. For a heartbeat, the boy saw flashes of himself, running barefoot, beneath stars, holding hands he no longer remembered, staring into rivers that no longer existed. They were moments he had lived, yet somehow forgotten. The touch faded, leaving only the thrum of his lantern. "You carry me," the boy whispered. "Even when I don't see you." The shadow gave no answer, yet a feeling swelled between them. Yes, always. They walked together then. The boy on the path, the shadow drifting beside him, their movements aligned like dancers who had practiced for years. For the first time, he didn't feel entirely alone. The silence of the land no longer felt heavy. It felt full. At one bend in the path, the boy stopped and asked, "Will you stay with me forever?" The shadow tilted its head, its body wavering faintly. The response was not words, but a sense. Not forever, but as long as you need. The boy nodded, understanding. Nothing lasted forever. Not flowers, not hours, not even shadows. But their presence, however brief, could leave something eternal behind. They came upon a pool of water, still and silver, reflecting the boy and his companion side by side. For the first time, the shadow had a face, not detailed, but softened into features like his own. He gazed into the reflection and realized something. The figure was not simply his shadow. It was everyone he had ever been, the child who dreamed, the wanderer who searched, the listener who loved. He whispered, "Thank you." The shadow's form bowed slightly, as if acknowledging his words before slipping back into stillness. Together they sat by the pool. The boy laid the lantern beside him, watching its glow shimmer against the water. The shadow leaned against him, and though it was weightless, he felt a comfort, as though leaning back into himself. The night stretched long, soft, and forgiving. The boy closed his eyes, and in the quiet he sensed the truth, that no one walks alone, not even in silence. Somewhere in the folds of time, a companion always follows. A shadow, a memory, a presence unseen yet steadfast. And so, when he rose again, lantern in hand, he walked not with fear, but with calm. The shadow followed, silent and patient, until the path itself seemed to carry them forward. The boy did not know where the road would end, but he knew this. He was no longer only one. He was two, light and shadow, past and present, memory and becoming. And in that knowing, the journey felt less like wandering and more like belonging. The boy's steps carried him further into the blurred land, where trees grew sparse and the mist thinned into ribbons that trailed along the ground. Ahead, through the greyness, a structure began to take form, a house simple in shape yet unusual in presence. It rose from the earth like it had been waiting for him all along, its walls pale and its roof sloped low as though bowing to the quiet sky. But what drew his gaze most were the windows. Dozens of them scattered across its walls, each one slightly different in size and shape. Some tall and slender, others small and square, some framed in wood, others rimmed in stone. They shimmered faintly as if alive, and when the boy drew near, he realized something strange. Each window whispered, not loudly, not enough to frighten, just soft streams of sound like breath against glass. He tilted his head, and the closer he listened, the clearer the whispers became. Voices, some were deep, others high, some gentle, others rough with age. They overlapped in endless murmurs, words tumbling and drifting, though never sharp enough to startle. The voices spoke in languages he half knew, tones he almost recognized, echoes of laughter, sighs, and half-formed sentences that ended as if swallowed by wind. He stood at the threshold, lantern glowing against the pale walls. The house felt patient, as though asking permission. The boy whispered, "May I come in?" At once the nearest window sighed, a sound like warm approval. The door eased open with a low creak, and the whispers grew quieter, like a chorus softening into welcome. Inside, the house was dim, but not dark. The lantern's glow filled the space with warmth, revealing wooden floors worn smooth by countless steps. The air smelled faintly of cedar and rain, and all around him, lining the walls and halls, the windows continued to breathe their murmurs, each one telling its fragment of a story. The boy moved slowly, listening. At one pane, he heard the laughter of children splashing in a river. At another, the low voice of a woman singing to a baby. At a third, the sound of rain on rooftops, followed by a man's soft sigh of relief. He touched the glass. It was cool, yet alive, humming faintly beneath his fingertips. When he leaned closer, the whispers steadied, as though offering themselves to him. "Why do you hold these voices?" he asked the house. The walls didn't reply, but the windows shimmered with a feeling he understood. "We remember." He realized then that this place was not made of wood and stone, but of memory itself. Every pane of glass carried the breath of someone who had once paused here. Travelers, wanderers, dreamers, and those who needed shelter from the silence outside. The house kept their voices safe, refusing to let them vanish completely. The boy wandered deeper, his shadow following at his side, though tonight it was calmer, less restless. Together they walked through narrow corridors where the windows leaned inward, whispering in overlapping tones, until they reached a wide room at the center. This room held a single window, larger than the rest. Its glass was milky, clouded, as though it had not been spoken through for a long time. The boy set his lantern down and approached it. At first there was nothing, only stillness, but then faintly, so faintly he almost doubted it, came a voice. It was a child's, fragile, tremulous. "Are you still there?" it asked. The boy's breath caught. He wanted to answer, though he wasn't sure if he was meant to. Slowly he placed his palm against the glass. "Yes," he whispered. The window trembled, and the voice sighed with relief. "I thought I was gone." "You're not gone," the boy said gently. "You're remembered." The voice faded, but not into silence. Instead it became something softer, like a thread joining the others, woven into the eternal murmur of the house. He stood there for a long time, hand resting on the glass before finally stepping back. His shadow lingered near the pane, as if bowing in respect. As he prepared to leave, the whispers rose again, but this time he noticed something new. They weren't only voices of strangers. Mixed among them were hints of words he recognized, tones of people he had loved but forgotten, lullabies from his earliest days, the hush of someone brushing hair from his brow. The boy's chest ached. Not with pain, but with a gentle, tender longing. This house, he realized, was not just a place for the voices of others. It was for him, too. It carried his fragments, his forgotten breaths, the echoes of those who had once loved him. When he reached the door again, he turned once more to the windows. The whispers had softened, weaving themselves into a steady hum, like the sound of the sea at night. He bowed his head, lantern casting gold across the floor. "Thank you," he said. And the house seemed to bow back, its windows shimmering as if smiling. Outside, the mist waited, silver and still. The boy stepped into it, lantern raised, his shadow keeping pace. Behind him the whispers continued, not as noise, but as comfort, a reminder that nothing spoken with love is ever truly lost. As he walked on, he thought of this, how even silence is full, how even absence is remembered. And somewhere deep inside, he carried the hush of the house like a lullaby he would never forget. The mist parted as if it knew the boy's path, folding itself back into quiet folds until the land opened wide. He stepped forward, lantern raised, and found himself standing at the edge of a meadow that seemed impossible, even in this dreamlike world. The ground stretched far and soft, a carpet of grass so pale it almost glowed, and scattered across it, countless points of light. They glittered faintly, some flickering like candles in wind, others steady like watchful eyes. From a distance, it looked as though the stars had abandoned the sky and poured themselves into the earth. The boy's breath caught in his chest. He lowered the lantern, realizing it was no longer needed, for the meadow itself was radiant. He stepped carefully into the field. The lights did not dim beneath his feet. Instead, they shimmered brighter, as though greeting him. Each step stirred, a small ripple, a faint glow spreading outward before fading into stillness. "What is this place?" he asked aloud. His voice seemed to vanish into the night. Beside him his shadow leaned close, its outline stretched long and thin across the luminous grass. It did not answer, but the silence felt intentional, as though urging him to listen. So he did. The field was not silent at all. Beneath the quiet hum of light, he heard the faintest sounds, whispers like distant bells, sighs like forgotten wishes, 1,000 gentle breaths exhaled into the night. The boy knelt down and touched one of the glowing shapes. It was not sharp, not hard, but soft, like silk warmed by memory. And then he understood. These were not fallen stars. They were wishes. Every forgotten hope, every quiet dream, every prayer whispered into pillows and left unanswered had drifted here, where they lay waiting, glowing faintly, refusing to disappear. He rose slowly, lantern swinging at his side, and felt his chest ache with a tender awe. The meadow stretched endlessly, each spark a story, a yearning, a fragment of someone's heart. He bent low to examine one. It shimmered blue, trembling with a faint vibration. As he touched it, a vision brushed his mind. A young girl standing, barefoot on a balcony, eyes tilted to the heavens, whispering, "Please let him come home safe." The boy gasped softly and pulled his hand back. The light dimmed, then steadied as though grateful to be remembered. He walked on, and another glow caught his gaze. This one pulsed gold. When his fingers grazed it, he felt a man's laughter, strong and echoing, paired with a silent hope. May this moment last forever. Each light was a life, each shimmer a longing. The boy's steps slowed as he moved deeper into the meadow, until he no longer tried to seek out certain wishes, but simply let them surround him. They glowed and hummed, weaving together into something larger than any single voice. His shadow walked just behind him, its form softened as if humbled by the vastness of what lay around them. At last, the boy came to the center of the meadow. Here the lights pooled together, a dense scatter of glow so bright it looked like a river of stars. He stood in it, lantern set aside, and tilted his face to the sky. Above him, the heavens were strangely empty. No constellations, no moon, only a velvet darkness, as though the sky itself had given all it carried to the field below. For a moment he wondered if that was the fate of dreams, that they did not rise upward, but fell gently, downward, gathering where they might be remembered. And perhaps when the world grew quiet, they waited for someone like him to notice. His eyes blurred with the shimmer, and he whispered, "So many." The meadow pulsed in reply as if agreeing. He lowered himself onto the grass and lay back, among the lights. They did not crush or scatter, but cradled him softly, humming at his skin. For the first time in a long time, the boy felt small in the gentlest way. Not insignificant, but part of something endless. He thought of his own wishes, the ones he had carried quietly, the ones he had hidden even from himself. Had they fallen? Here too? Did his hopes lie among these lights, glowing faintly, waiting for his recognition? A soft glow flickered near his hand. He turned to it. The light pulsed pale and shy, as though uncertain. When he brushed it with his fingers, warmth spread through his chest. He saw himself as a smaller child, standing at the edge of sleep, whispering words he could barely recall. "Please, let me not be alone." His throat tightened. He closed his hand over the light, and for a moment it glowed brighter, as if embracing him back. His shadow crouched near, hand-shaped form brushing close, though it could not touch. Still, he felt its presence like a companion's comfort. The boy released the glow and it drifted upward, hovering before settling back into the grass, steadier than before. Above, the dark sky stirred faintly. A few stars flickered in the distance as though remembering themselves. The boy smiled, soft and weary, and whispered, "Thank you." The meadow shimmered in reply, an exhale of light rippling outward across the grass, as though 1,000 hearts sighed together. He closed his eyes, listening to the hum, and thought, perhaps no wish is wasted. Perhaps they all find their way here to rest, to glow, to wait. When he rose again, he felt changed. Not larger, not stronger, but steadier, like a lantern with more oil than before. He picked up his real lantern, though it seemed small compared to the glow around him, and began walking again. At the edge of the field, he turned back once more. The meadow rippled softly, its lights bending toward him, as though bidding farewell. He bowed his head in gratitude, and then stepped forward, his path pulling him toward the next horizon. Behind him, the field remained, an eternal cradle of wishes, glowing quietly for anyone who might wander there again. The boy followed the narrow path beyond the meadow of fallen wishes, and soon the air began to shift. It grew cooler, damp with the scent of stone and flowing water. The hum of glowing grass gave way to a softer sound, steady, hushed, like a voice that had been speaking for centuries without ever raising its tone. He walked until the land sloped. Downward, and there, through the veil of night, he saw it, a river winding slow and deliberate through the valley. Its surface shimmered not with starlight, for the sky was still dark and near empty, but with its own secret glow, as though each ripple carried a memory it was unwilling to let go. The boy stepped closer. The water moved without rush, weaving across smooth stones with a patience that suggested it was not traveling anywhere in particular. It was simply being, flowing because that was its nature. He crouched at the edge, lantern light mingling with the river's faint gleam. He leaned, closer listening, and that was when he heard it. The river spoke, not in words he could immediately understand, but in syllables that shifted like wind across reeds, soft and steady. He tilted his head, listening harder, until at last he realized what it was saying. Names. The river was murmuring names. At first they passed too quickly for him to grasp, whispers layered over whispers, some bright, some aching, some trembling with joy, others heavy with longing. A chorus of lives spoken softly into water. The boy reached out, letting his fingers graze the surface. The water was cool, and where he touched, the voice seemed to pause, gathering itself. Then, gently, a single name surfaced, clear enough for him to hear it was his own. He froze. His heart thudded once, twice, then softened into awe. The river had remembered him. He drew his hand back and the current shifted again, names flowing past, some unfamiliar, some tenderly human, each carrying weight and love. He whispered into the water, testing his voice. "Do you know them all?" The river answered not with words, but with a slow shimmer. Its current deepened as though nodding. The boy sat down on the bank, lantern at his side, and listened. For a long while he let the names flow past him. A grandmother remembered. By her grandchildren, a child spoken of only once before sleep, a friend who had left long ago but lingered here still. Each name was a memory, and the river seemed to cradle them, holding them safe from silence. He wondered then, how many times had people whispered names in the dark, afraid they might be forgotten? How many voices had dissolved into the air, yet been caught here by water that refused to let them vanish? As he thought, his shadow lingered behind him, leaning close as though it too was listening. Its outline shimmered faintly in the river's glow. After a while, the boy cupped his hands into the water and spoke a name of his own. It was not the name of someone alive, nor someone he had known deeply, but one he had heard once in passing. A teacher from his earliest days, kind but often overlooked. He whispered it with reverence. The river responded at once. His hands trembled as the name echoed back to him, soft and gentle, carried along by the current. It was as though the river was saying, "Yes, I know them. I remember." The boy's chest warmed, and tears pricked his eyes. He whispered another and another. Each time the water returned them, not loud, not sharp, but steady and sure, as if assuring him that nothing spoken with care would ever truly be lost. He thought of the meadow he had just left, glowing with forgotten wishes. Now he found their counterpart. Here was where memory lived, where names lingered even after lips had gone silent. The boy lay back on the bank, eyes half closed. He let the river's murmurs wash over him. Some names were in languages he did not know, yet they carried the same tenderness. Others were so faint they nearly dissolved, but the river still whispered them, refusing to let them go. And then, without warning, he heard a name that made him sit upright. It was his mother's. The sound of it was gentle, carried with a love so strong it hurt. He hadn't spoken it aloud in many nights. He hadn't even dared to think of it too clearly, for fear the ache would overwhelm him. But here it was, floating past in the current, as though someone somewhere had remembered her too. He leaned over the water, whispering, "Where did you hear her name?" The river shimmered, but gave no answer beyond the endless flowing. Perhaps it didn't matter. Perhaps every name once spoken found its way here. His shadow touched the water as well, its fingers rippling the surface. The boy imagined that even shadows carried names, those whispered to them in loneliness, in prayers spoken to the dark. He sat there for a long time, whispering names into the water. Some were from his past, some from his imagination, some from the meadow of wishes he had just crossed. Each time the river received them with patience, folding them into its endless memory. At last, When the night grew deeper, the boy rose to his feet. He bowed slightly toward the river, as though to a friend who had shared a secret. "Thank you," he whispered. The river murmured back, a soft chorus of names, his among them, sliding into the distance. He picked up his lantern and began to walk again. The sound of water followed him for a long while until it faded into silence, but even as it disappeared, he carried the feeling of it within him, that no name was ever truly gone, no memory entirely erased. Somewhere, always, the river remembered, and that was enough. By the time the boy left the valley of the river, the night sky had begun to change. The stars that had once hidden themselves returned, faint at first, then brighter, like shy companions gathering near. The path curved upward, leading him toward a hill that seemed to breathe softly with the earth itself. He climbed slowly, lantern in hand, his shadow following faithfully beside him. The ground was gentle underfoot, as though it had been waiting for him all along. Each step carried no urgency, only the hush of a journey nearing its final turning. At the top, he found a quiet place. No meadow, no glowing grass, no murmuring. River? Just stillness. The kind of stillness that was not empty but full in its own way, like a deep inhale before rest. He sat down, lantern at his side, and gazed at the horizon. It was not yet dawn, but the faintest hint of silver lined the edges of the dark, promising morning, though it had not yet come. His shadow sat beside him, not behind him, not stretched away, but beside him, as though it, too, wanted to rest. For the first time, the boy truly looked at it. Its outline was softer than before, less sharp, almost blending into the earth. He felt no fear, only tenderness. "You've been with me all this time," he whispered. The shadow did not reply, but he felt it listening. He imagined it breathing, in rhythm with his own chest. He thought then of the meadow of forgotten wishes, glowing quietly in the dark, of the river that remembered names and never let them slip away, of the fields where the air carried laughter, and the moments of kindness that had shaped him when no one else had noticed. He thought of his mother's name, carried in the river's current, of his own name, whispered back to him as if to say, he mattered too. He realized something. His journey had never been about reaching a destination. It had been about learning how to walk gently enough to notice what was already here, to listen to the whispers most people never pause to hear. The boy leaned back, resting his head against the cool ground. His eyes drifted to the stars above, more numerous now, spilling across the sky like uncountable lanterns. For a moment he felt very small, and yet not insignificant. A part of the pattern, a note in the endless lullaby of the night. His shadow rested beside him, its edges fading softly into the earth, until it was no longer clear where he ended and where it began. The boy closed his eyes, and in the quiet he heard the echo of the river, the laughter of the meadow, the lull of the clouds, all weaving together, not as memories but as gentle truths, flowing through him like breath. He understood then that every step, every whisper, every name had been enough. Nothing was lost, nothing forgotten. And in that stillness the boy let himself exhale, not with finality but with peace. The world too seemed to sigh in return. Somewhere in the sky a star shifted, glimmering once more before dissolving into dawn. And with that, the boy stretched, not upward, not outward, but gently into the space around him, as though becoming part of it all. His lantern flickered, then stilled. The hill grew quiet. The night held him like a cradle, and the world, soft as ever, continued to breathe. "Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man. The end."